Marketers treat consumers like emotional beings, but they assume B2B buyers are cold, calculating machines. But the person scanning the cereal aisle on Sunday is the exact same person approving a software contract on Monday. There is a pervasive myth in corporate marketing that B2B requires heavily engineered, hyper-rational campaigns. The assumption is that the business environment overrides human biology. Buyers do not leave their brains at the office door. They operate under identical cognitive constraints at work as they do at home. That biological hardware struggles with two constants: fading memory and divided attention. A corporate buyer is just as distracted by emails, meetings, and deadlines as a consumer is by a crying toddler. Empirical data from How Brands Grow Part 2 shows that because the human brain remains constant, B2B markets obey the exact same laws of market physics as consumer goods. Treating B2B growth differently than B2C growth is a strategic error. The mechanics of how a brand grows do not change just because the buyer is wearing a suit. To understand how B2B companies actually grow, we have to look at the mathematical distribution of market share. In every competitive market, there is a pattern known as the law of double jeopardy. Smaller brands suffer twice. They have fewer buyers, and the few buyers they do have are slightly less loyal. This table shows UK business banking data. As penetration and loyalty decline together, smaller banks have fewer clients, holding fewer products. When transitioning to US business insurance, the exact mathematical pattern repeats. This isn't an anomaly, it's a universal law of buying behavior. Where do new corporate customers come from? It's governed by the duplication of purchase law. Looking at customer overlap, B2B brands share customers strictly in line with the competing brand's size. Every business insurer shares more clients with State Farm than with smaller niche providers. True growth requires taking share from the biggest competitors in the market. A company cannot scale by targeting a narrow, isolated niche. Yet B2B marketing departments obsess over customer retention, engineering complex loyalty programs to stop churn. The data shows defection rates are structurally tied to overall market share. A baseline level of churn is normal, expected, and largely beyond a marketer's control. B2B growth is an acquisition game. To overcome inevitable churn, companies must abandon loyalty engineering and build a continuous pipeline of new customers. Triggering that constant customer acquisition requires building one primary asset: mental availability. In a B2B context, mental availability is simply the propensity for your brand to be thought of when a corporate buying situation arises. If you are not remembered, you cannot be bought. This exposes the first major flaw in B2B media planning: the prioritization of zero wastage and hyper-targeted account-based strategies. Hyper-targeting limits exposure to a tiny fraction of the market, creating an ineffective echo chamber that completely misses the broader pool of future buyers. The second flaw is concentrating the marketing budget on a single event, like an annual industry expo. This graph contrasts a massive, isolated spike in activity against a continuous, low-amplitude wave of broad reach. That isolated spike creates memories, but it cannot sustain them. It fails to combat the natural decay of the buyer's memory over the other 364 days of the year. To drive consistent acquisition, B2B media must be planned for continuous, spaced reach to all potential buyers, accepting a degree of wastage to ensure the brand is present when the buying window finally opens. When acquisition stalls, B2B marketers often claim that non-buyers have deeply evaluated their product and rationally rejected it in favor of a competitor. We can test this assumption by comparing empirical rejection rates between consumer and corporate brands. Look at this data for UK banking. Among businesses that have never been a customer, active brand rejection sits at an incredibly low percentage. Corporate rejection rates are frequently lower than everyday consumer rejection rates for the exact same category. The vast majority of business customers do not harbor negative perceptions of brands they haven't used. They simply hold no strong opinions at all. The primary barrier to corporate customer acquisition is not a wall of objections, it is obscurity. A lack of sales does not mean a company needs to overcome deep-seated rational objections. It means buyers aren't thinking about you because you lack mental availability. Marketers must actively construct that missing mental availability through their messaging. This is done by linking the brand to category entry points, the specific internal and external cues that trigger a buyer to enter the market. Standard B2B messaging fails at this by focusing entirely on abstract corporate spreadsheets and theoretical ROI. Effective messaging must instead navigate the three constituents, the specific, very real human pressures that exist inside every B2B buyer's mind. When making a purchase, corporate buyers balance three distinct interests. First, themselves, prioritizing personal goals, career advancement, and avoiding getting fired. Second, their colleagues, worrying how bosses and peers will react to new suppliers. Third, their customers, considering how procurement choices impact downstream clients. By appealing directly to the human pressures of these three constituents, messaging successfully links a brand to an actual buying situation. Establishing mental availability is useless if the transaction itself is difficult. This requires physical availability. The brand must be undeniably easy to find and buy the moment the procurement window opens. Physical availability in a professional environment is built on three pillars: presence, prominence, and portfolio. Presence means ensuring comprehensive market coverage across all relevant sales channels, from open tenders and RFPs to inbound digital portals. You must be where the transaction happens. Prominence is the necessity of using distinctive brand assets to cut through the visual noise of the corporate environment. B2B buyers navigate crowded email inboxes, complex procurement interfaces, and dozens of pitch decks that all use the exact same corporate blue. A brand has to stand out instantly to be selected. Finally, portfolio is the management of a disciplined Planet lineup. It must meet standard buyer repertoires without overwhelming them with unnecessary confusing variants. Meticulously reducing friction across presence, prominence, and portfolio ensures that the mental availability you built actually converts into market share. The empirical data strips away the illusion of B2B exceptionalism. Corporate markets are simply mass markets wearing suits. Despite the corporate facade, these markets strictly obey the laws of double jeopardy and duplication of purchase. Because the biological hardware processing the decisions remains the same, the mechanics of market physics apply directly to the boardroom. Companies must abandon the delusion of the hyper-rational B2B buyer. By deploying mass market principles of continuous reach, you can re-engineer your entire marketing apparatus for constant customer acquisition.